Did you guys have lunch already? Nakapag-lunch na ba kayo?
Yes, sure.
Yes, katatapos
Okay,
lang.
very good.
Yes po.
Kakatapos lang. Okay, nice. That's good, guys. And so, 5 pa lang tayo. Anyways, just a reminder lang, yung exam natin would be on Monday, and that would be uh, 8 a.m. Pero I'll make sure that your exam stays open until 12. And also, your handouts, I'll post the PowerPoint for this one and also handouts on the CLE later. If not later, if I'm not able to post the handouts later, tomorrow morning, and so that you will have something to review. Basically, the handouts would just be tables. Most of them would be tables instead of yung like essays or summaries, so that you will have easier time. And syempre, that would may risk dyan sa cheating, pero I'll make sure that my questions are a bit more complicated, and at the same time may time limit naman tayo, so if you didn't really review or if you didn't really read through the handouts, then you'll still have a really low score, I think. Ayan, pero syempre I think you'll find ways if you if you're really determined to cheat, pero just make sure that you don't. Ayan, kasi the point of the classes is not for grades, right? It's for assessing if you really have learned something. Yan, medyo romantic pa rin yung view ng teacher niyo with regards to the classes. Anyways, ayun. So, do we have any questions so far? Sa 7, ilan tayo? 5 pa lang. Oh, 3 pa lang kayo dito ngayon. Okay, 3 of my students. Do you have questions so far?
Wala. Wala pa naman, sure.
Wala pa
Po.
naman. Okay, none. I can see Shy. She has her video on, I think. Ayan, sige. Anyway, sige. So, we'll wait for the others first. Pero just as a review or actually an introduction to the lesson, today we're gonna discuss institutions and processes of the Philippine government. And actually, this is a very broad topic. Ayan. And um, it would take a very, very long time if we were to discuss everything in a very comprehensive way. So, what we'll do is we'll just provide an introduction to these 4 specific topics: principle of separation of powers, the principle of checks and balances, the executive, as well as the legislative. And then we're gonna not discuss the judiciary. Later na lang yung judiciary natin i-discuss kasi it's not covered in the exams, and you'll actually learn so much factual information, and it might get overwhelming if we really proceed with all of the topics that are listed in your book. So, eto lang muna yung 4 na ito. Okay, so do we have any questions regarding this this topic so far or your exam coverage? May questions ba tayo?
Wala pa naman,
Wala
sure.
po. Ay, ma'am.
Okay. So, yeah, Simon.
Hindi po siya question, pero kung nakalabas po kayo, napapansin niyo rin po ba yung mga yung sako-sako na nakapaskil sa kada poste po? Tapos yung mga nakalagay
Ah,
doon.
hindi pa ako nakalabas, Simon. Ano ba yung nangyayari ngayon sa labas? What's happening?
Kasi since taga-Kuwait po kami, tapos dumadaan po ako pag pumunta po kami Katiklan, tapos namamalengke po. Napapansin ko po yung
Mm-mm.
yung mga sako-sako, tapos nakalagay na mga CPP, NPA, mga salot sa lipunan. Mga
Hala,
ganun, ang dami po nakakalat.
totoo? Sa labas?
Opo.
Okay, ayun talaga. Oo.
Hindi lang
Yes,
po yun
yes,
yung
sige,
mga nakalagay,
continue.
halo-halo po. May mga CPP,
Mm-mm.
NPA, salot sa lipunan, or yung gobyerno. Yung mga ganun-ganun po. Wala lang, nakakakaba lang po.
Oo,
Yun
hindi
lang.
kasi ang raming budget ngayon ng ang raming budget ng military at ng PNP para mang-red tag ngayon. I don't know if they're the ones who are
Yun,
making it, but yeah, but then
marami
a
lang
lot
po
of the
talaga. Tapos,
mm.
ayun, yung iba po natatangay na nung hangin. Yun lang. Ko lang
Mm.
bakit may mga ganun.
Uh, Ayun, just so you know guys, yung 2021 budget natin nakalabas na, and yung pinakamataas na allocation is syempre sa DepEd kasi hindi DepEd, actually the education sector, DepEd, CHED and TESDA, and your state universities and colleges, sila may pinakamataas because it is mandated by law that the education sector should receive most of the budget. But if you see after that, DPWH, and then the next one is the Department of National Defense. And yung police natin and the military, they get a really big amount of the budget. So some people are contesting that. Is it really necessary to have a military approach to the COVID-19 pandemic right now? Right, the military is needed and the police are needed, but with regards to what they are doing with the budget, parang kasi a lot of the things that they are doing right now is to contain yung threat or yung sinasabi nilang threat of communism, as well as yung mga leftists. So a lot of the budget goes to red tagging, and hindi lang siya hindi grabe talaga ngayon. Like ang raming mga aktivista yung pinapatay sa loob ng bahay nila, which is unlawful, walang warrant of arrest. Yung kanilang mga sorry, nagrarant naman ako. Pero yung kanilang mga bangkay, for example, hindi pinapakuha sa family nila. So, dinedetain or kinukuha ng military dun sa may like the ano nga yun, basta yung 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 before funeral homes or funeral houses. So that's illegal. It's not mandated by the, and ngayon din yung community pantries ba, a lot of the 'di ba ngayon yun yung do you know the community pantries? Ito yung ginagawang efforts ng maraming mga community dun sa may Manila area, lalo na kung saan they put a pool or a pool of food, so that people who might need food as well as other supplies might just get them for free. And a lot of the community pantries are actually being checked by the military when nakalagay sa batas na, or the police na, when nakalagay sa batas na hindi siya dapat i-check, because again, this is a non-profit thing, right? And it's for community, it's a community service, right? So they don't need a permit to do that if they're exhibiting or andun naman sila sa private space. Kapag public space lang, for example, nakaharang sa daan, then they might intervene. Pero to do that, you still need a warrant. And again, hindi talaga dapat 'yun inaaresto. So there are some considerations, for example, kapag for example sa pagpila, 'di ba masyadong nakakadikit or walang social distancing, so pwede mag-intervene diyan. Pero if the things are in place naman, right? And then the community pantry is not doing anything to incite rebellion, or wala namang political organizations that are a bit suspicious that are doing the community pantry, then it's not gonna be something that should be checked, right, by the military or the police. So yun, pinopoliticize pati yung mga community efforts, which is really worrying. Yeah, and it's really disappointing as well. If you're the government, you should be able to, lalo na kapag local government ka, and even the national government, you should actually promote those things because it shows civic participation, di ba? And it shows the empowerment of citizens to help, di ba, other citizens as well who might need it the most. It's so very disappointing. Anyways, tatlo pa rin tayo dito. Anyways, sige, let's just record this. Thank you so much, Simon. Do you have any other opinions, or do you have any other thoughts about what's happening right now, or observations, or anything that you would like to share?
Yung
Krista,
sa
ikaw,
Facebook
or
din po.
ano yung sa
Sorry.
Facebook?
Yung sa
Oo.
Facebook po na nagkaroon po ng issue na kapag ino-open daw po yung parang mga files po na sinesend sa inyo, mare-red tag ka daw
Mm.
po, tapos inaano na po siya ng Facebook, like yung company yata ng Facebook. Inaayos na nila
Inaano
at
na.
para malaman daw kung sino daw
Mm.
behind that motive po
Yeah.
na yun.
Yeah, pero I
Yeah.
don't believe them. Kasi yung Facebook, actually, the governments can legally ask for information from Facebook and other social networking sites. So generally, the amount of governments that are asking your personal information from Facebook and the other social networking sites are increasing. Yung US yung pinakamaraming inaas na information, pero governments are allowed to, legally allowed to. So ayun, merong sort of like transaction between the governments as well as this big social media sites that contain a lot of your information with regards to private information that supposedly should not be made public, right? Or should not be used as a weapon against you. And so, medyo, medyo sketchy, di ba? Ayun. Pero sana nga, ma-regulate. Kasi it's a violation of the right to privacy, di ba? If may ganong klaseng sitwasyon. Ayun. We don't expect that from democracies. We expect that from authoritarian governments which control their social media and so on. So sa China. Pero if you're a democratic government, then it's not gonna be, or it should not be, it should not be tolerated, and it should not be what the government is doing, because again, it violates the rights, diba, that are put in the constitution, so on. So hindi siya dapat. Yan. Uh, so we have to be very careful about what we say online. And even if you're not a leftist, kahit hindi ka komunista, if you're just like, if you just give some sort of criticism to the government, or for example, you're a human rights defender, and it so happens that your advocacies, even though you don't oppose the government, really still somehow aligns na hindi siya gusto ng gobyerno. Kasi ganun talaga kung minsan, kahit you're just trying to push for your rights, and if the government does not want that kind of inconvenience, sometimes then you could be in the wrong side, diba, of the government, of the force of the government. So ayun, medyo ano siya, medyo mahirap pag sa ngayon. Sige, so, sige. So thank you so much, Simon, for those thoughts. Let's just proceed to the topics. First one, we have the principle of the separation of powers as mandated in the 1987 Constitution. And this is the one that is really the most important thing about how our government is formed. So the Philippines has a democratic republican government. Ibig sabihin, you're a democracy, and syempre the power of the government rests only on the people. And republican, ibig sabihin, we have a representative government, and that people, the citizens of the country, elect certain officials, leaders, to represent them in the government. Okay, so with regards to this, we have the separation of powers. And yung separation of powers na ito yung naging ideya, 'di ba, sa at ginagamit ng mga demokrasya ngayon. Kasi in the past, there was no separation of powers at all. 'Di ba? Before, we had the monarchy, or in the pre-colonial period we had the datu, and the datu had all of the powers with him. So he creates the laws, he implements the laws, and he judges whether the laws are correct. But the principles of modern democracy has said na no, this could be something that could lead to abuse of power, and historically it has led to abuse of power, diba? Because of the monarchy and so on. And this was what was introduced, diba? Through the revolutions, inintroduce to ni Montesquieu, tapos ni na Tocqueville, mga political scientists natin, and they said that every democracy, to prevent abuses of power that were shown historically, should have separation, with different branches having different responsibilities and duties, so that a democracy could be maintained. So in the Philippines, we're using a sort of separation of powers with three main branches. Sa ibang mga bansa, meron silang two main branches, where the executive and legislative is just one branch, right? Or it's composed, diba? Or may ano. Pero later on, we'll talk about that. Sa Pilipinas, may tatlo tayong separate but equal branches. And they all work together. So you have the executive, the legislative, as well as the judicial branches of government. They have separate jobs, but at the same time, to prevent abuses of power, to prevent each branch from being too powerful, which could lead to abuse, they also have a system of checks and balances for each branch. So the executive would check the legislative, the judiciary would check the legislative, and so on. Nakabalanse yan lahat sila sa parang isang scale. Okay, sige. So, who here knows what the executive branch of the government is composed of? At saka yung ano yung ginagawa nila? Sorry, tatlo lang talaga kayo. So, I'm gonna ask you people to recite, which is fine naman. Sige, see, let's have Krista. Executive branch of the government. What do you think this is composed of? Ayan, okay. Yes, yung executive. Sino yung executive or hekutibo na branch?
Yung, ano siya, yung sa may, Sa may Malacanang. Sure. Or
Okay, very good. It's
president.
correct. That's correct. Yes, that's correct. Tama. Ayun. So yung executive, this is composed of the president, the vice president, and his cabinet members. Yung cabinet members, guys, these are the ones that are in charge, or the secretaries of the Department of Health, Department of Public Works and Highways, lahat-lahat yan, yung mga kinakailangan ng Pangulo so that laws could be implemented in the different sectors, whether health, whether education, whether transportation, and so on. All of these sectors are necessary, and the leaders of these sectors are necessary so that the laws would be implemented. Okay, so the executive has one function or main function, diba? They are the ones that carries out the law. So it is the president which leads this. He is the one that carries all the laws. And then yung vice president, actually vice president medyo spare lang siya. She does not or he does not really have any duties unless he or she is assigned a cabinet, uh, ayun, or ano, like usually binibigyan sila ng cabinet. Right? But then yung pinaka-importante talaga is yung mga presidente tsaka yung kabinete niya. 'Di ba? Yung mga departments natin and the different sectors. So they are the ones which carries out the law or implements the law, right? But before the law could be made, there is a branch of government that creates, that amends, change, or that also repeals the law. Pwedeng kunin yung batas or i-delete, i-delete yung batas. Okay, so for this branch, we have the legislative, right? Legislative are the ones, or the legislative branch of the government are the ones that makes the law. And the legislative branch is composed of our Congress with its two chambers, right? You have the Senate as well as the House of Representatives. Okay, so with regards to the Congress natin, yung ating Congress ay may 'di ba? May upper house, yung Senate natin with the 24 senators, 23 ngayon kasi si Leila de Lima wala. And then you also have the House of Representatives, which has 304 members right now, right? And they all represent, or sa House of Representatives, they represent the different districts of in the country. So we have two, for example, sa Aklan, right? Because we have two districts now instead of one. And at the same time, it is also composed of party lists, which represent different sectors of the country, usually the marginalized, diba? So mga magsasaka, mga teachers, mga babae, so on. Yan. Then you also have the judicial or the judiciary. It is composed of the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, and then the other courts that are under the Supreme Courts with their specific functions. So you have the regional trial courts, you have the tax appeals court, you have the Sharia courts, so on. We will discuss that later. Pero eto yan sila, iba't iba yung kanilang mga specific na rules and functions. And all of them would balance each other and work with each other as well. Okay, so eto yung ating ano sa Pilipinas. Pero hindi, ayan. Ito yung ating like summary, right? A table of our branches, executive, legislative, as well as the judiciary. So, yung blue lahat to is executive, and makikita natin that all of the executive roles come from the national papunta sa local, 'di ba? So, nation, the president is in charge of the whole nation. And then you also have the autonomous region. We have one autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. You also have province, municipality, or autonomous region. Bangsamoro region pala, sorry. Iba na yung pangalan niya. And then you also have the province, the cities, and then the barangays. Right? And all of them are beholden to the president. And you also have your legislative with two separate houses, Senate as well as House Representatives. And syempre, not only do we make laws in the national level, but we also make laws in the local level. But the laws that are made in the local level, guys, should be based on the laws that are already existing, right? And should be constitutional. Ibig sabihin, nagsusuporta lang siya sa kung ano nakasaad sa konstitusyon. Hindi sila pwedeng mag-violate sa mga laws na nakalagay na or nagawa na in the past. For that to happen, kailangan gumawa ng national legislation, right? Ayun. So, for example, you cannot say in Aklan na, okay, let's implement death penalty, right? Because in the national level, we don't have a law, diba? For we don't or we have already repealed our clause for death penalty. So, illegal na siya ngayon. And so, These are the specific parts of the legislative branch, and the judiciary is the last part, which we will not discuss today. Pero you could see that you have many branches, or you have many courts, right, with their specific functions as well. Ayan. And this makes up basically what the government is. Ayan. So in the different types of democracies, we have three main types. You have the presidential. The first one, this is something that we use, right? Because we have a president. And yung sa presidente, paano siya binoboto? How is the president being voted? Kasi sa ibang countries, hindi ito nila ginagawa. Ayan. Okay, sige, Shy. How is the president, sorry, parang kinder one na question, pero just entertain your teacher. How does the president, how is the president voted?
May ano din, Chair, mga tao.
Okay, very good. So direct vote, no, from the people, ganon. So the existence of a president depends on a direct vote of the people. And it's the same, thank you, Shai. And it's the same for the Congress as well. So the people vote for the Congress, diba, yung House of Representatives natin, these are all filled by the votes, or these are dependent on the votes of the people or the citizens. And then you have the president, and the position of the president, the vice president is filled based on the votes of the people as well. Other countries do not have that kind of system. So these countries are called parliamentary systems. And what they do is the only thing that people vote for is the representatives, diba? They vote for what makes the parliament, yung mga gumagawa ng batas. And what happens is that the parliament would vote for the prime minister. Ayun. So hindi sila hindi sila nag-elect ng head of state nila, and yung kanilang head of state is not dependent on the vote of the people. Instead, the head of state is voted by the members of the parliament. Right? And you also have semi-presidential. Ito yung medyo magulo, which France has, and some countries. And sa semi-presidential, they both have a president as head of state, and they also have a prime minister as head of the government. And both of them have specific duties. Yung sa head of state, symbolic usually yung role niya, so for international diplomacy, while the prime minister, he is really the one that executes the law as given in the government, and he also makes the laws along with the members, right, of the parliament. Right, so it depends kung ano yung separation of powers. Sa presidential, we have, di ba, three? You have an executive, you have a legislative, and a judiciary. Sa parliamentary, the prime minister is part of the executive and the cabinet, but he is also, or she is also part of the legislative, kasi nanggaling yung kanyang pagboto sa parliament. Ayan, so madali lang actually yung sa parliamentary, medyo madali yung pagpasa nila ng mga batas. Sa presidential, medyo hindi masyadong madali kasi the president is of a different department compared to our Congress. Okay, so ito yung these are the list of countries that have presidential, parliamentary, as well as semi-presidential na systems. Ayan. There's another one, a very interesting one, pero like ano lang, yung isa sa pinaka-unique is Switzerland. The Swiss, what they do for their governments is they elect 7 people, basically as cabinet, and nagte-take turn sila sa pagiging president. So they're the only thing. They're the only country that has that kind of system. And in the future, guys, probably we will see those kinds of systems emerge because makikita natin ngayon yung inefficiencies, diba, of the different systems. So presidential has some inefficiencies in that it is a bit slower, pero the checks and the balances or systems of balances, kasi yun yung ini-insist, diba? Principle of checks and balances and the idea of separation of powers, so that abuse could be prevented. So very rigid yung processes sa presidential, very slow. Right? Sa parliamentary, hindi as slow, pero at the same time, there could be systematic abuse happening, lalo na kapag hindi robust or masyadong democratic yung bansa. Okay, so if you implement, for example, a parliamentary government in the Philippines, later on we will look at the differences. It might come to a point where it could be abused. Right? Kasi nga hindi ini-elect ng mga tao yung presidente. So the president or the prime minister. So the prime minister, what it does is to be beholden lang to the parliament, to the Kongreso. Imagine yung ngayon, guys, hindi natin pwede ma-vote out yung president, 'di ba? The only the only people that could vote a prime minister, for example, is the ones that are already in Congress. So wala silang fixed terms. They could vote for that person again and again as long as there is no loss of trust. Pero if they lose trust in the prime minister, then pwede, madali din yung pagkuha sa kanya. Pero 'di ba, in situations or in democracies that are weak and captured by the elite, for example, sa Pilipinas, kasi most of our Congress are from the elite, right? It might come to a point wherein yung ganong klaseng demokrasiya, the elite democracy, would be propagated, right? Because hindi or walang masyadong sistema kung saan yung majority ng mga tao or mga citizens makakapag-participate directly sa pag-elect ng presidente, right? Ayun. So, this can be something that could be abused. But as you could see, the countries that have implemented parliamentary modes, European countries, are very democratic. Before pa sila nagkaroon ng democracy, before pa sila nagkaroon ng parliamentary system, democracy muna sila. And if you see their history, yung parliamentary government, most of them come from monarchies. Monarchies yan sila dati. Yung sa presidential, these are usually colonized countries. And for example, sa Pilipinas, inspired by the US presidential democracies. Ayan. And have adopted the constitutions of the US. Okay, so ito yung pinaka summary ng ating difference between presidential as well as parliamentary system. If we look at the way that the diagram is being presented, sige, who wants to explain? Does anybody here want to explain the diagram? Okay, we have a person who is, ayan. Good afternoon, Krisha. Sige. Okay, so, Simon, can you explain the first one sa presidential system? Yung arrow is chooses. Can you try to explain the process of how a presidential system is created? Here.
Wait po, naguguluhan po ako sa diagram na konti.
Okay, naguguluhan. Sige, ako na lang. Okay.
Opo,
First,
opo.
you look at the voters. Oo. Ayan, sa voters natin, yung voters, sila yung may responsibility of choosing the legislature. And our legislature is the Congress. So yung mga senators natin, tsaka yung ating representatives. And then the voters also choose the president, which is the chief executive. And then what happens is that the chief executive or the president appoints the cabinet members with the permission or with the concurrence, diba, or with the agreement of the Congress. Ayan. And then the chief executive also appoints the judiciary, yung ating mga justices, 'di ba? Yung chief justice, associate justice with the concurrence or with the agreement of the Congress. Ayan. Pero the voters, they are the ones which make sure that the legislature and the chief executive are filled. So parliamentary system, however, we have something that is quite different. So for this one, the voters only have to choose the legislature or the Congress. Sila yung maglalagay ng mga representative nila, yung mga lawmakers nila. And from that pool of lawmakers, yung gagawin ng mga lawmakers is to elect a prime minister or a chief executive. Ayan, sa kanila din manggagaling. And after that, what happens is that the chief executive would create a cabinet, diba? Yung mga ministries nila, so that the laws would be implemented with the concurrence or with the agreement of the parliament, diba? And then after that, the cabinet would also put in place the judiciary. So maraming mga parliamentary system na models, pero this one is a simple one, the British one. And this is the process. Pero marami yan silang iba't ibang klase ng pamamalakad. Pero basically this is the idea, right, of how or who fills the government. Again, kapag presidential, the voters fill the government sa executive, specifically sa president and vice president, and then sa Congress din, 'di ba? And the Congress as well as the presidents would make sure that the cabinets are filled. And then they would also appoint 'di ba, yung ating mga justices and associate justices. Okay. If hindi pa masyadong clear ngayon, don't worry, we'll have a table in the handouts so that it would be a bit easier for you guys to understand. And I'm also gonna post some videos so that for the ones that are more visual in understanding these things, you can also look at the videos so that it might be a bit clearer as well. Okay, do we have any questions?
Yan po.
None. Okay, sige. Ayan. Eto yung sa ating or eto yung yung different types of or two types, 'di ba? You have the parliament or parliamentary and semi-presidential na governments, and then you also have yung presidential na government. So for example sa US, usually what happens in the presidential government, the head of state and the head of government is the same, 'di ba? Pero for presidential as well as parliamentary or semi-presidential pala and parliamentary governments, the head of state and then the head of government are not alike. So, for example, sa Britain, with a parliamentary system of the government, usually, or sa Japan, usually they would have a monarch, diba? Kasi historically, meron silang monarchy, and yung head of state, sila yung nagre-represent, diba, ng state sa mga international affairs, pero they do not really have any rules sa lawmaking. Right? Parang lang sila, symbolic na body. Pero sa kanilang pag pag-process at saka pag-institute talaga sa government nila, they have the prime minister. Right? And France, which has a semi-presidential government, pero they do not have a monarch kasi pinatay na nila yung mga monarchs nila, have a president which serves as the head of state, and then the prime minister which serves as the head of government. Ayun. So medyo magulo to, guys. Pero just think of the different types of government systems as a process or a relic of the historical processes which made them. The reason kung bakit walang monarch yung France is kasi nagkaroon nga ng French Revolution, pinatay nila yung mga monarchs nila, they're really anti-monarchy. So instead of appointing a head of a state using a monarch, they have a president instead. And some people in the Philippines nga are saying na um, dapat tayo din may separate or may semi-presidential kasi sometimes the person who is uniting the country, the head of state, 'di ba? The one who is good as being a symbolic like leader, ibig sabihin sila nag-rally ng support, she unites or he unites the people, uh, iba sa namamalakad ng gobyerno. Okay, so for example, if you have a system like this, the technical side, 'di ba, would be handled by the prime minister. Ayun, while kung saan man napupusuan ng tao, 'di ba, the ones that which people are loyal to would become the head of state, right? Ayun. So may iba't ibang klase na leader sa isang country, but they all have different purposes, right? So the head of state, they are the ones that are the symbol, the ones that unite. And then the government, sila yung talagang namamalakad, 'di ba, ng mga processes ng gobyerno sa bansa, 'di ba? Pero what we're doing right now sa presidential systems natin is that the president is the symbol of the country, and at the same time he executes the law. Right? And that's a very hard set of shoes to fulfill, right? Ayun. So medyo mahirap, 'di ba? Kasi we also expect the president to be the one who would be the uniting force, and not only do the technical side but also the moral, the spiritual side, 'di ba, of governing a country. Yan. Okay, so eto yung mga specific na aspects, pero this will be put in your handout na lang. Just read through this, guys. Kung ano yung difference between the presidential system and prime minister. Marami yan sila. Who is the head of state, how they are selected, what are the terms of office, the removal process, and so on. Ayun. We're not gonna discuss that anymore. Just look through it in the handouts. It's very easy to understand, right? Ayun. Okay, so we have another aspect of the separation, or after the separation of powers, you also have the checks or the systems of checks and balances. And so sa Pilipinas, kinakailangan yung checks and balances sa presidential system natin sa tatlong branches na ito. We have the legislative branch, we have the judicial branch or the judiciary, and we also have the executive branch, and all of them check each other, right? to make sure that no one has more power over the other. And so I'm just gonna show you an example of this. Okay, and how they are being checked. Kasi hindi siya makita fully sa ating PowerPoint. Okay. Ayan. Okay. Yan. So, aside or complementing the separation of powers, diba, the system of checks and balances ensures that the government branches could independently exercise their powers and at the same time not be bullied by the other departments. Kasi sa 1987 Constitution natin, guys, just think of the 1987 Constitution as a praning na institution. It's very rigid. It's very comprehensive. Ang rami niyang aspeto. It's a really comprehensive document, and it's very rare to find this kind of document compared to the other constitutions of other countries. Ours is actually very long and comprehensive. And the reason for that is because na-trauma yung mga tao because of the Marcos Constitution, the 1973 Constitution. What happened during that time was Marcos was given so much power through the 1973 Constitution kasi gumawa siya ng parang parliamentary na government. He became the executive, and he also, it was the legislative, or he controlled the legislative at the same time. So he had lawmaking powers and he also had executive powers, 'di ba? And syempre because of that, iisa lang, 'di ba? Nagkaroon ng yung tinatawag na batasang pambansa, siya din yung head nun sa paggawa ng mga batas, siya din nag-execute ng batas. So ang bilis, pero at the same time very prone to abuse. So yung ginawa ng ating 1987 Constitution is talagang ginawang rigid and very meticulous yung process ng pag-check natin sa bawat branch ng government. Ayan. So for example, sa legislative branch, they have certain powers. They make the laws that passes the national budget. They have the power of the purse. They approve about what the agencies have requested for their budget. And you also have the executive branch. They enforce the laws that were created by the legislative branch. And they also propose new laws through the State of the Nation address that is done by the president every year. Right? Yun yung nanghihikayat sa Kongreso kung ano yung dapat na mga batas na gagawin for the specific year. What are the needs of the people? And you also have the judiciary, which checks on both branches. They are the ones which reviews the implementation of the laws as well as the creation of the laws. And at the same time, to make sure that there is peace and order in the country through the lower courts, they also impose a system of punishments for crimes. Right? Ayon. So they all have their different duties, but they all have their different checks. Ayan. So yung ating legislative, they check on the executive branch. Ayan. They make sure that the executive branch does not abuse its powers or the powers given to it. First one, can override presidential veto. So yung veto, guys, this is the power of the president to refuse laws. Ayan. Pwede niyang i-refuse yung mga batas na pinasa ng Kongreso natin sa kanya. Ayun. And our presidents have actually done this before. And so, for example, Noynoy refused in the past to grant a law that would give income or basic income to our poor population. And then you also have confirms executive appointments. So kapag may ina-assign or inire-recommend yung president natin na mga cabinet secretaries, for example, si Gina Lopez sa DENR, the Congress has also to approve that recommendation of the president or that appointment of the president. And for that particular thing, si Gina Lopez, she was not approved by the Congress. That's why she didn't become DNR secretary because the Congress did not approve her appointment by the president. And at the same time, aside from that, they could also impeach and remove the president. So the House or the chamber that starts the process of impeachment is the Congress or the House of Representatives, but the one that decides and executes the impeachment process along with the Chief Justice natin and the Associate Justices in the Supreme Court is the Senate. Ayan. So for this one, yung nangyari, yung gumawa ng impeachment process kay Erap is yung Senato natin. Ayan. So he was transmitted to the Senate for trial, and but before the impeachment proceedings actually occurred, before siya na-impeach, nagkaroon ng uprising, and he was also convicted already of graft and corruption by the Sandigan Bayan. Ayan. That was a really interesting time kasi the representatives that composed the House of Representatives and even the Senate during that time, most of them kaalyado ni Erap. Right? So, nagagalit yung mga tao dati kasi sa House of Representatives, almost na hindi sila nagboto sa pag-impeach kay Erap kasi nga, ang rami sa kanila na miyembro ng same party ni Erap. Right? And they do not want Erap to step out of the presidency. Right? But because there was public outrage, na pressure yung ating Kongreso to proceed with that impeachment process. You also appropriates money for the national budget specifically. Ayan. So, yung pagtalaga ng budget natin, ginagawa yan ng Department of Budget and Management, along with our different department agencies through a budget call. Nag-ask sila kung ilan yung kinakailangan ng DepEd for this year, ilan yung kinakailangan ng DPWH, given yung mga ginawang batas. Kasi guys, sa every time na gumawa ng batas, kailangan may budget yan. Hindi gagawa or hindi ubra yung batas kapag walang budget. So all kinds of laws, VAUSI program, the Reproductive Health Act, Free College Tuition Act, nakalagay dyan kapag gumawa ng batas, the department agencies or the agencies that would implement the laws and the budget should be there as well, right? So hindi sa batas mismo, pero the idea that these department agencies should be given specific budgets. And what happens is that usually these budgets, lalo na sa DepEd, DPWH, would go higher every year. At kapag mag-a-add ka pa ng mga bagong batas, for example, instead of free college tuition, mag-a-add ka pa ng free graduate like na law, right, para sa mga magma-masters, that would be an additional burden or additional amount of budget that needs to be allotted. So every time you create a law for a specific sector every year, which the Congress does, you need more and more budget, diba? And it's no wonder that our national budget keeps increasing every year because there are new laws being made each year, and because new laws are being made, budget have to be appropriated so that these new laws actually would be effective. Right? Kasi hindi ka talaga magkakaroon ng effective na law if you do not put budget into it. And you also have ratified treaties, right, or agreements with other like organizations and other countries. So, ayun, yung presidente natin, siya yung gumagawa actually nito. Diba? The executive determines how much money should be given in the specific department, pero dapat may approval ng Congress lahat. Ayan. So, because may approval ng Congress, hindi inaabuso ng presidente yung mga ganitong powers niya. Diba? And then, yung ano naman, yung presidente natin, kasi pwede din magkaroon ng abuso yung ating legislative, 'di ba? So what it does or what the president does to check on the legislative branch is they can veto laws. Pwede niyang hindi i-approve yung batas. So, dalawang klase ng veto, guys. You could approve or disapprove of a law, right? Or you could also disapprove some line items, yung mga specific na parts ng batas. So usually yung ginagamit sa pag-disapprove ng line items is para sa taxation natin. Kapag may specific na sa mga maliliit na bagay, may mga specific na parts na hindi nag-agree yung president, pwede niyang i-disapprove lang yung specific na parts. Pero some of the laws are really disapproved as a whole, right? So yung gagawa niyan kapag prosigido pa rin yung Kongreso, ibabalik pa rin. Ayan, and they need to revamp it and then pwedeng ipasa ulit. Right? Okay, and you also have, they can also call on special sessions to the Congress. Kapag, for example, ngayon, di ba, COVID-19, there's an immediate issue that needs to be resolved, or there's an immediate issue where a specific law needs to be done so that this issue could be helped or resolved, diba, through that specific law, then gagawa siya ng emergency or special sessions of with the Congress so that this certain processes would be made faster, right? So mas madali or mas ano na or pwede na siyang mag-execute kasi nga kinakailangan ng batas before you could be able to execute. So that is what the president does. He has powers of immediacy over the Congress regarding specific issues. Right? Ayan. So for example, yung example dito is President Duterte vetoed certain provisions of the Task Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion Act or TRAIN, such as the one that would earmark incremental tax revenues, which he said will lead to reduced share of the health sector in the proposed allocation. Ayan. So, binito niya yung taxes on tobaccos. So, pagtaas ng taxes ng tobaccos all over the years. Ayun. Okay, and aside from that, syempre ito yung legislative and the executive branch checks each other. The executive branch and then the judicial branch also checks each other. So it is the president which appoints the judges of the judicial branch. Ayan, and they can also grant pardon to offenders, right, if necessary. First one, the appointment of judges. President Duterte has appointed a new Chief Justice just last month, and he could do that. Right? Along kasi medyo mahaba yung process, kailangan pa rin ng review. Hindi lang yung presidente gumagawa neto. There's a judicial bar council, and then you have the president, and they go through a process of choosing the prospective justices or lalo na sa chief justices that they could appoint. Then after that process, they would appoint that, right? Pero kailangan pa rin ito ng approval as well ng Kongreso natin. So all of these are being checked. And at the same time, he could also grant pardon to offenders. And I don't know if you remember this, but he granted a very controversial pardon to a murderer, right, of Jennifer Laude. Ayun, this was a really controversial issue during that time. Granted the pardon to an American soldier who murdered. Ayun, and then kapag pardon, the list of crimes. Kasi sa pardon dapat na-acknowledge na ikaw yung gumawa ng crime. And after that, the president decides, right? Kung like basta like the president would decide if pwede kang i-pardon. Pero yung nangyayari dito guys is hindi lang yung presidente, kailangan din yan ng approval ng ating courts. And the courts approve this decision ni President Duterte, and it's really something that a lot of people were outraged by. Yeah. And you also have the Supreme Court. So it checks the legislative branch. It can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. Ibig sabihin, nag-violate ng konstitusyon ng Pilipinas. And ito yung example ng, ayan, yung ginawa nila kay Noynoy before, sabi nila, the Supreme Court in July 2014 declared specific acts and practices under the Disbursement Acceleration Program of the Aquino administration as unconstitutional. So, yung ginawa kasi ng DAP, guys, is instead of, dapat yung budget kasi natin na hindi nagamit, i-appropriate yan, gagawan pa yan ng batas. Like, i-declare sa Congress and then gagawan ng batas. Pero yung ginawa nila, nag-fast forward sila. So the savings, yung mga hindi nagamit sa Department of Health, Department of Public Works and Highways, the budget that was allocated but was not used throughout the years, sila mismo yung nag-distribute sa executive branch. That cannot happen, right? It's illegal under the Constitution, and this one was declared unconstitutional. Right? Ayan. And then you also have the legislative branch to check on the judicial branch. They can impeach and remove justices of the Supreme Court. And an example of this was the removal of former Chief Justice Renato Corona. Yan, because he was not able to declare his statements of assets and unwilling to declare his statements of assets, liabilities, as well as net worth, thus declared unfit, right, for the position. And they can also propose amendments to overrule judicial decisions, right, or court decisions. So all of those are the certain checks and balances that the different departments would have. Ayan. So this will also be presented in your handouts. Medyo marami yan sila. Pero just remember that sa isang presidential democracy with three branches of government, one principle aside from the separation of powers is the uh, system of checks and balances, so that the principle of separation of powers is also made possible or is actually actualized, diba? Para talagang totoo nga may independence of each, and that each branch does not bully each other. They have to check each other. Right? Lalo na sa president or sa executive branch, kasi usually this becomes the most powerful branch. And even right now, people are still criticizing na parang masyadong powerful pa rin yung executive branch natin. Ayan. Sige. So, anyways, a very complicated process. Pero, ayun, yun nakalagay. Just remember that kinakailangan to because of the 1987 Constitution, just to make sure that abuse of power that happened during the martial law period through the 1973 Constitution does not occur again. Pero still, yun nga, sinasabi ng lawyers ngayon, parang hindi naman totoo. Okay, so we start with the first branch, the executive branch. The executive, syempre, the head of the executive branch is the president. And this is, or the roles and duties as well as the qualifications of the president is declared in Article 7 of the 1987 Constitution. So executive power is the power to administer or implement the law. And under the 1987 Constitution, this is power that is vested in the President of the Republic of the Philippines. She or he is assisted by the national and local officials who are either elected, right? So elected, may elected tayo na officials, the barangay captains, the mayors, but then there are some officials that are bureaucrats. They are not elected. Instead, they are appointed. Right? So the cabinet members and as well as the cabinet secretaries are all appointed by the president. And syempre, kapag sa barangay level, also appointed by our barangay captains and so on. So eto yung formation nung cabinet ni Duterte before. All of these people are necessary because they all represent the different sectors that are prioritized by the government or are under the duties of the government. Finance, for example, kasi these are public goods, diba? Agriculture, foreign affairs, economic development authority, budget and management, public works and highways, labor and employment. Hindi pwede na yung president mismo yung mamumuno lahat dyan. So he assigns different cabinet members, right, to make sure that, or yung tinatawag nilang department secretaries, to make sure that the laws that were created by the Congress that pertains or that is related to the delivery of services for the different sectors are also implemented well. And so for example, yung DepEd, diba, yung mga batas na na-implement dyan or are concerned with that is yung ating K to 12, Free College Tuition Act para sa CHED. Lahat yan, kinakailangan ma-implement ng mabuti. And all of these cabinet members execute the laws, diba? So that public services in terms of education, healthcare, finance would be delivered to the people. Yun talaga yung kanilang role lang. Execute lang. Hindi sila gumagawa ng batas. Kung ano yung batas, na nakaagapay sa sector na kanilang nire-represent, diba? Based on their department, they are the ones which execute the laws that are given in that specific sector. And so all of these are the department or the cabinet members of the Duterte's cabinet, and a lot of them actually are replaced or some of them resigned. So for example, Perfecto Yasay, he was replaced by Alan Peter Cayetano and then was replaced by Teodoro Locsin. Si Ernesto Pernia, he resigned from the position of NEDA and he was replaced by Frederick Chua. Ayun. So marami yung nag-resign or pinalitan for this specific thing. Si Sal Panelo, presidential spokesperson, was replaced by Harry Roque. Ayun, and so on. So marami sila na medyo umiba na. So, eto yung just examples of how medyo hindi naman unstable, very like sudden or sort of hindi masyadong yun nga, hindi medyo unstable yung cabinet ni President Duterte. So, for example, sa DILG, dati si Ismael Sueño, and then he was fired, and then he appointed Catalino Cuy, and then he appointed another person again, Eduardo Año. Pero with regards to the cabinet appointments, 'di ba? There's something na nakapagtataka, and the Congress is actually questioning this right now. Yung sinasabi ng Kongreso na parang hindi naman magaling or hindi naman respectable yung performance ng isang specific na ahensya ng pamahalaan na ito, and they're questioning the appointment of President Duterte with regards to this. Do you know about this already? The Congress is saying na, okay, we're trying to make protests regarding the appointment of this specific person. Ito yung talaga yung pinaka-importante sa COVID ngayon. Okay, so yung 'di ba yung si Duque, uh Francisco Duque was like his credibility as the Secretary of Health is being questioned by a lot of people, but it seems that President Duterte is unwilling, right, to replace him as the secretary for the Department of Health. So people are just asking why, 'di ba? Ayun, pero makikita natin there has been a series of replacements given the different departments, as we could see. Ayan, so Gina Lopez, she was appointed Environment Secretary, but then because our Congress, a lot of the Congress members are actually elites, which are part of mining or has family in the mining industry. Ayan, it's no wonder that they disapproved of Gina Lopez because she really pushed some radical things on the mining industry. So hindi siya na-appoint because of political play or power play sa Kongreso natin, and instead the one that was approved by both the president or appointed by the president and approved by the Congress is Royce Matu, who is still the DNR secretary until today. And so maraming politika talaga dito. Yan, ito yung ating major public officers under the executive branch as well as the positions they manage. So you have the president, the vice president, all of them are elected by national election. You also have cabinet members as well as the bureau chiefs. These are appointed by the president. The local officials are all elected, right, by the people as well. Yan. So these are the major executive officers under the executive branch of the government. Ngayon, ito yung pinaka or isa sa mga pinaka-importante na organizations or force sa ating executive branch. And these are composed of the different departments. Ayun. So we have the Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Diseases. And syempre, yung executive dyan is President Duterte because he's the president and he's the chief, right? But it is also chaired by the different secretaries of the agencies or the departments that have relation with the COVID, diba? So, syempre, Department of Health, Francisco Duque III, you have Carlo Nograles, you have Department of Foreign Affairs, you have the DILG, you have the NEDA, Transportation as well. All of those would be part of our IATF, diba? And all of them implement specific guidelines as decided by all of these cabinet members. Ayan. So, ito yung pinaka-importante ngayon with regards to our executive department. Ito yung qualifications natin kapag you want to be a president or vice president, very basic qualifications. So, this follows the qualifications under the United States Constitution as well. You don't need to be of any profession. Pero most of our presidents are lawyers, actually. Yeah, most of them. Even President Duterte himself is a lawyer. Ayun. Yung citizenship natin, dapat natural-born citizen of the Philippines ka. You have to be a registered voter, minimum education, able to read and write. That's the minimum qualification as a president. Age, dapat 40 years ka on the day of elections. But it seems right now, a lot of the presidents, not only in the Philippines, but also in other countries, are just getting older. So si Biden, Trump, Duterte, they're a bit old. It's 70 na ata si President Duterte or more than that. Yan. You also have residency. You should have at least 10 years immediately preceding the presidential election in the Philippines. Yan. You also have the terms of office. The day of election of the president, kung kailan mag-elect ng president, is for 2021, syempre, and for any year where there is a presidential elections, it's in the second Monday of May. And then the term is 6 years without re-election. And this is another thing that the 1987 Constitution limited because, again, they're scared. They do not, if you remember, guys, Marcos was the longest running president that the Philippines ever had with 21 years in office. And they do not want that kind of thing to happen again. So they made sure that in the 1987 Constitution, no re-elections are possible. 6 years without re-election. This is different from the US Constitution wherein pwedeng mag-serve ng 4 years in president but there's re-election of 2 terms. So for example, si Obama, he was re-elected twice or elected pala twice, right? The second one is re-elections and he served 8 years. But sa Pilipinas, hindi pwede. And yung vice president pwede. Pwedeng re-elections, but 3 successive terms hindi na pwede. Pwedeng 2. Yan. So she could serve 12 years if she wanted to. Yan. And the start and the end of term is June 30, 12 noon. After that, he steps down from office and will be replaced by the next president of the Philippines. Yan. You have the executive powers of the president. First one, administrative powers. It is the president that has the power to control over the executive department of the government from the national level, diba, the cabinets niya, and then to the local level, from the provinces, from the barangays, from the towns, right? Over all local government units such as the province, city, municipality, as well as the barangay. Ayan. Aside from the administrative powers where he has control over all the administrative like branches of the government, he also has military powers. So he is the chief or the commander in chief of the armed forces of the Philippines, which means that he could have the power to call out armed forces to prevent or suppress lawless violence, invasion, or rebellion. Pero he cannot declare a state of war, guys. Only the Congress could declare a state of war. Pero he could use the armed forces of the Philippines, or he could command the armed forces of the Philippines to make sure that a rebellion or any wars or an invasion could be suppressed. Ayun. Yan. And aside from that, he could also create military tribunals to try persons who violate military laws or commit crimes against national security. With regards to that role, he could also suspend the writ of habeas corpus. And yung writ of habeas corpus, hindi to basta-basta pwedeng or suspension pala ng writ of habeas corpus, hindi to basta-basta pwedeng magawa sa lahat ng panahon. For example, if you declare martial law, it doesn't mean that kapag mag-declare ka ng suspension of writ of habeas corpus, it doesn't mean na lahat ng crimes would be under that. Right? So the courts would still work, pero for certain types of crimes, such as if you are accused of inciting a rebellion or invasion, yun lang pwede mag-suspend ng writ of habeas corpus. For the people who might be unfamiliar with this word, yung writ of habeas corpus is Latin for procure or bring the body to the courts. Dapat makita, malites yung tao who is being suspected of crimes doon sa korte. He should be able to have like a court hearing or court sentence. He should be able to be given a lawyer, and at the same time he should be able to defend himself or through a representative in court. So dapat pakita siya. And the elitists, 'di ba, kapag talagang ginawa niya yung crime na iyon and so on. Pero in certain situations that require immediacy, for example, kapag nagkakaroon ng rebellion or invasion, hindi na kinakailangan na magkaroon ng paglilitis pa kapag, for example, si siya yung nag-lead, 'di ba? For example, she's head of the MNLF and yung MNLF sinakop niya yung isang like sector ng Aklan or Malay. Hindi na kailangan na ilagay or ililites si Shai sa korte. Pwede na siyang immediately under the control of the military. Kasi ngayon, yung ginagawa nila is dapat kapag dinetain ka for 3 days, for example, you're an activist and you are detained for 3 days without having recourse to a lawyer, then it's illegal under the law. Hindi pwede yon. Pero makikita natin, there's still violations happening. So there are certain people that have been detained. Ibig sabihin, andun sila sa detention center, inoobserbahan ng military, mga 500 days na, di ba? 100 days. And that's illegal without any lawyer, right? Or hindi nililitis yung kung talagang may ano ba, may substance yung kinakaso sa kanila or ina-accuse sa kanila. And so that's illegal. It should not be something that should be tolerated because it's unconstitutional. Hindi yan pwede. Pero because of the lack of or hindi kasi efficient yung courts natin. Actually, our courts in the Philippines are severely understaffed by 22%. And yung lawyers natin as well, hindi enough, right? For the people that need these lawyers. And at the same time, our government does not really take human rights as seriously as we want it to. So these things are being disregarded. Diba? And you also have the military powers. Aside from that, he also has the power to declare martial law, specifically during invasion or rebellion. So for example, yung ginawa ni President Duterte nung nagkaroon ng Marawi na rebellion or occupation ng Maute Group is to declare martial law not in Marawi area lang, pero actually in Mindanao specifically. So he did this while he was in Russia in 2017. Yan, May 23. Yan. So, eto, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall likewise be suspended in the aforesaid area for the duration of the state of martial law, which means that the military could summarily arrest, right, the people which they think are like the ones that the rebels, the invaders during that time. So mas madali na, hindi na kailangan ipa-face sa korte sila. Right? Pwede na silang i-judge by the military itself. Yan. Ito yung ating mga presidents that have declared martial law. Gloria has declared martial law na nagkaroon ng gulo yung sa MNLF before. Syempre si Marcos and President Duterte as well. And you also have Laurel, Jose P. Laurel during the Japanese occupation. So these are the presidents that have declared that. You also have executive powers of the president. The president has pardoning powers as well. He has the power to grant reprieves, commutations, and pardons, and remit fines or forfeitures after conviction by final judgment. So yung gumagawa 'di ba ng sentence or ng hatol is the courts, but the president has certain powers to change the sentencing of the courts or to actually just disregard, 'di ba, the sentence of the courts itself. So dito sa Pilipinas wala tayong death penalty. Meron tayo dati kay during Fidel Ramos's time, during Marcos's time. So some people were actually executed by that time. But then nung panahon ni Gloria or I forgot, Erap or Gloria, either those two, the Congress repealed that death penalty law. Right? So wala ulit tayo ngayon. But if there is a death penalty law that is in place, the president could grant a reprieve. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng i-postpone yung execution ng isang tao which is convicted of a death sentence to a further date which is specified. Yung sa suspension naman, pwede yung postponement pero indefinite. Ibig sabihin, walang specific na date na sinabi yung presidente. Commutation, this is a reprieve granted para ma-lessen yung sentences. So for example, instead of a life sentence, pwedeng i-limit to a number of years like 50 years, 40 years. And then you have the two most important things. You have a pardon as well as an amnesty. For pardon, this is granted to individual persons. So for example, this is what President Duterte did to the Marine who killed Jennifer Laudes, Joseph Scott Pemberton. He gave a pardon, an absolute one, to Joseph Scott Pemberton, and people were really outraged during this time, right? Pero eto yung conditions para magbigay ng pardon yung presidente. Kapag pardon, um, this is granted to individuals. Hindi kinakailangan na merong approval ng Kongreso natin. And then, dapat i-prove na ginawa talaga iyon. And then, yung judgment dito is, it relieves the pardoning of the consequences of the offense. So, for example, kay Pemberton, di ba, is like a sentence. And what happens is that nawala yung consequence, wala yung sentencing niya sa korte natin. And he went back to the US after that. But you also have another type of presidential like privilege, which is the amnesty. So this one is for political offense, usually rebellion, Ayun. And this applies to a group or class of persons. Yung kay President Duterte and all the other presidents, what they did was to give amnesty to MNLF rebels in the past. Si President Gloria gave amnesty to certain soldiers, including Antonio Trillanes, who was one of the rebels, right? Soldier rebels during that time, right? Who occupied a hotel in Manila. But they were given amnesty, and what happens is that kinukuha niya yung ano, parang it it re- it erases the crime that has occurred. Parang bago kang ano, you're like a new citizen. So if for example kayo tatlo dito, nag-rebel kayo, if you are granted amnesty by the president, the past, 'di ba, your rebel past would be erased. It's like there's no trace at all. So it means that walang i-erase or walang records sa sentencing nyo, diba? With regards to whatever sort of violation was given to you in the past. Yeah. But again, the condition for this one is you must acknowledge that you have committed the crime. Yan. But then, for the amnesty, kailangan din ng approval ng Congress. So pardon, hindi na kinakailangan. But you could see how powerful the president is. And aside from that, you also have a lot of people that are considered to be like dubious, 'di ba? Na pinapardon ng mga presidente. So for example, si Bong Revilla was convicted of a crime already, was pardoned by President Duterte. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo as well was pardoned by President Duterte. Yan. So all of these people that people do not want, or a lot of people do not want to be pardoned, were pardoned by the president. Yan. And aside from that, you also have the power to contract and guarantee foreign loans on behalf of the Republic of the Philippines. They could have either multilateral treaties sa pagkuha ng loans with the banks, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Asian Development Bank, or pwede ding bilateral, country-wise. So ngayon, yung ginagawa natin sa COVID is we're actually having a lot of loans, specifically sa Asian Development Bank. We're not really borrowing money or a lot of money from IMF and the World Bank. We're keeping our borrowing domestically as well as sa Asian Development Bank lang, which is a better strategy, I think, because it means that we're not really borrowing in dollars, right? Because a lot of countries are borrowing in dollars right now, and this might be a problem for them in the future. Ngayon, lalo na kapag dollar becomes more expensive, they will need to catch up about with how they are paying in dollars. Ngayon. So I think that the government did a really good job for this aspect at least. We borrowed only with our local businessmen and the local banks and the Asian Development Bank. But aside from that, you also borrowed a lot from China. So President Duterte engaged with bilateral treaties, specifically loans from China, and people are judging this borrowing. Kasi yung interest rates ng China is bit higher than Japan, which we used to borrow a lot from. But because yun nga, justify na it's not just borrowing from China, hindi lang to makaka-benefit sa atin like economically but also politically in the future. So we're trying to create a political alliance with China, and at the same time, if we choose China to borrow money from, there's also a lot of things that China will give us. Yun yung kanilang ano, kasi yun yung kanilang justification. So for example, for this one is China will give us lots of projects, Kaliwa Dam project, irrigation, but with conditions. Dapat Chinese firms, a lot of them would be handled by Chinese firms as well. Specifically right now, yung ating mga proyekto, lalo na sa energy sector natin, is being handled by a lot of Chinese firms. So sa Cebu, for example, sa Mindanao, a lot of the energy sector, sa geothermal, sa coal, a lot of them are handled by Chinese firms. And yun nga, yung sa West Philippine Sea na issue, there's already a proposal by the Chinese government. They kind of they were outraged because gusto nga nila sana yung deal is between President Duterte and sa kanila lang, 'di ba? Sila mismo yung magdi-deal kung ano gagawin sa West Philippine Sea. And the proposal is that 40-60. 60% ng revenue that will come from the West Philippine Sea would be with the Philippine government, while 40% would be sa China. But what happened was even before kay President Duterte, uh, the Aquino administration already made it into an international issue, right? And the Philippines still keeps on insisting on its rights from China, on the West Philippine Sea, and tries to involve other international organizations like the UN, diba? And the international courts with regards to the judging. So, yung China, ayaw nila ng ganun. Gusto nila country to country lang and direkta yung pag-deal. But the Philippines does not want this. They want it to be an international issue, which it is. Kasi nga, if China has the West Philippine Sea, or if China has power over the West Philippine Sea, and it also has a lot of power over the South China Sea pa rin, it could come into a point wherein mas maging politically unstable because a lot of the other countries are also defending rights to their specific seas in the South China Sea area. Kasi hindi lang Pilipinas yung merong claim doon, di ba? You also have Vietnam, which is defending their territories well from China. You also have Indonesia, Malaysia as well. So, yung balance, 'di ba, of powers could actually become more attuned to China instead of ngayon medyo may mga security checks pa. You also have budgetary powers. Kamusta kayo guys? Okay pa kayo dyan? Are you
Yes,
still
okay
Okay
okay?
lang
naman.
po.
Okay, okay lang naman. Ayun,
Okay
I
pa
keep
naman po.
if you have any questions, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Ayon. And if you have any insights while we're discussing this, please do not hesitate to ask. I'll get until 2:30 to discuss the rest of this. Okay. Just tell me if you have any other thoughts about this. You also have executive power. So the budgetary powers of the president. The president is authorized by the Constitution to prepare the budget of receipts and expenditures of existing and proposed revenue measures and to present it to the Congress. So for this one, hindi yung president mismo, but then the cabinet members prepare the budget through the Department of Budget and Management, and the president would approve. But before maging batas, 'di ba? Kasi kailangan ng batas para magtalaga ng national budget. Kailangan na ipresenta to sa Congress, and then the Congress will approve or disapprove the specific budgets that are allocated to the different departments. Ayun. And this budget is created through what we call the General Appropriations Act. Appropriations, ibig sabihin how much budget is appropriated or allocated per department given a certain year. Right? So, for 2021, ito yung ating General Appropriations Act, and this is President Duterte signing this already. Ayun. So, yung cabinet yung magpe-present, 'di ba? And then the Congress will deliberate if okay nga yung pagtalaga ng budget, if they agree with what or how much budget is being allocated to the DPWH, the Department of National Defense. And kapag okay na, after a series of debates, after a series of discussions, if kulang ba yung sa isa, kapag sobra ba yung sa isa, so on, what the president does is, again, kahit sa anong batas, kasi batas to, di ba? They will sign that bill into law through the president's signature, and after that, it will be released as a law or an act to the public. And this is done every year. So the act that details the budget or the national budget of the Philippines every year is known as the General Appropriations Act. And ayan, eto yan, yung sa atin. And yun nga, yung pinakamalaki na budget ngayon, 2021, as always, is the hindi DepEd, the education sector under the DepEd, the CHED, as well as the TESDA, yung tatlo na mamamahala, and then the DPWH, the infrastructure is next under the DPWH, the Department of Transportation, National Economic Development Authority, all of those department agencies that has to do with infrastructural development has most of the budget. And you also have the Department of or the social protection sector under the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Syempre, you also have the health sector under the DOH. And all of those sectors will be given a budget given what they have demanded and what the Congress has decided that should be given to them. Actually, kahit yung Congress yung may power of the purse, isasabi na ng power of the purse, yung nagsiset pa rin ng budget is the executive department through the different department agencies. And what the Congress does is just to approve or disapprove or debate ayun, kung ano yung nakalagay sa budget. So they're not if you remember, 'di ba yung ating powers, it is the the executive branch which sets the agendas, 'di ba? Sila yung nagsasabi kung ilan dapat yung ilalagay or saan ilalagay yung budget, sila nagse-set ng agenda. Pero yung ating legislative branch, they are the ones which have the power to decide, decision making na powers. Pero again, medyo ano sila, they're dependent kasi nga yung gumagawa ng batas para magbigay ng budget, 'di ba, is still the legislative even before. Kasi nga yung budget again ng ating executive branch, the different departments is dependent on the law. The only reason why kinakailangan ng budget ng DepEd or ng CHED or ng education sector na ganito kalaki is because of the laws that have already been done by the Congress. So, ganito kalaki yung kanilang budget because eto yung nakalagay sa Constitution, eto yung kinakailangan para ma-implement yung K to 12 Act na ginawa ng Kongreso natin, eto yung kinakailangan na budget para ma-implement yung Free College Tuition Act na ginawa ng Kongreso, and so on. Ito yung kinakailangan para ma-implement yung increases in teacher salary na ginawa na batas ng Kongreso. So even though even though sila yung gumagawa ng budget, again, because of the laws of the Congress, dun pa rin nagde-depend. So they have a mutual relationship, both of them. Again, yung ginagawa ng executive natin is nakadepende lang talaga to sa legislative. Diba? Okay, so removal of the president could be removed voluntarily. Voluntary, ibig sabihin siya mismo yung nag-decide na mag-step out of the position of president or involuntarily. So through the powers of the Congress, the president could be impeached. Ibig sabihin, aalisin siya forcibly ng Kongreso through a hearing or through a trial wherein he will be deemed unfit as a president because of violations that he have made to the Constitution of the Philippines, such as corruption or like corruption charges or graft charges, like what Erap did. Pero he could also do this voluntarily kapag nag-resign siya by himself or he has died or kapag may disability siya or because of like incapacity. Hindi na siya capable or he has deemed himself incapable to be in the position of the president. And what President Duterte says is he keeps threatening to quit. Diba? The presidency. Sabi niya, gusto niya mag-resign daw. Ayun. Pero there has been no president yet in the history of the Philippines that has resigned. Still, in Japan, which has a really very meritocratic and shame-based society, a lot of their prime ministers have already resigned. Yung presidents nila have already resigned from position. Yan. Ito yung ating summary of line of succession. So this is what happens. For example, if the president is removed from his position, there will be someone who needs to occupy that position. And meron silang line of succession. Ibig sabihin, ito yung next in line. Vice President, which is considered to be the spare, siya yung mag-uupo sa pwesto after the president is removed voluntarily or involuntarily. So, yung sa atin is si President or si Vice President Leni Robredo. Kapag si Vice President Leni Robredo is deemed incapable or if she does not want to be president, then next in line is the Senate President, currently Tito Soto. And kapag hindi then judged or kapag mag-resign siya voluntarily or involuntarily from that position, he will be succeeded by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, which is si Joy J. Velasco, si Christian J. Velasco, who is the House Speaker currently in the lower house right now. And so sa history of the Philippines, there have been a lot of successions. President Manuel Rojas, because he died of a heart attack, was succeeded by his Vice President Sergio Osmeña. Ramon Magsaysay, who died through a plane crash, was succeeded by who succeeded him? I forgot. Was it Carlos P. Garcia? And then si President Erap was removed from his position
because of people power 2. Actually, sinasabing unconstitutional daw yung people to power 2. Pero anyways, was removed from his position by the people, and he was succeeded by the Vice President, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. So we could see that there has been a history of the importance of the Vice President with regards to the succession of power. Kasi a lot of, or two presidents have already died and one has been impeached. Yan. So kinakailangan may Vice President tayo. Ito yung summary natin. Please read through this lang, guys. This puts most of the important things for the executive. Okay. Anyways, you have the next one, the legislative power. This is given to the two branches of government. We have the to the two houses. We have the Philippine Congress through the Senate as well as the House of Representatives. The upper house, the Senate, composed of 24 senators, and then you also have the House of Representatives, which is composed of 307 congressman right now through your party list representatives as well as your district representatives. Distrito means yung mga specific na lugar, di ba, or districts. And then party list, which represents the marginalized sector in the country. And then you also have the legislative lawmakers in the provincial board. Yung ating mga tagagawa ng batas sa bababang pamahalaan or sa DILG or sa local government units. Ito yung ating senators na nagwagi nung 2019 elections, the top 12. Every year guys kasi every 3 years pinapalitan yung bottom pinapalitan yung 12 na senators every 3 years. So eto yung pumalit na 12. Si Cynthia Villar with 24 million votes, papunta kay Nancy Binay with 14 million votes, and they're different parties. Ayan. And eto yung 2016, eto hanggang ngayon, they are still serving in office. Pero in 2021 elections, they will need to run again. Yung ating senators kasi, 6 years lang sila, pwede. And at the same time, yung iba will need to be re-elected kasi every 3 years. So pinapalitan ng 12 every 3 years yung iba. And so sa 2016 elections, eto yung top 12 natin, si Drilon, Joel Villanueva, si Tito Soto who is the Senate President right now, Leila De Lima who is not who is not serving because she's currently detained because she was accused, right, of being unfit for being a senator. Nagkaroon ng hearing sa kanya. And you also have this for the House of Representatives. Lahat ng ating mga kongresista, guys, aside from being elected, aside from making the laws, they chair certain committees. Tapos yung committees na to, may specific sila na ginagawang or na parang specialization kung saang batas gumagawa sila. Yan. So, for example, wait lang. Wala pa dito. Si Lord Alan J. Velasco, he is in charge of energy. If there are certain issues or certain laws that would be proposed for the energy sector, kailangan siya yung mag-lead sa pag-deliberate ng specific na conditions with regards to these laws. So, nangyayari yan sa second na hearing. Medyo complicated yung process na ito at mas ginagawa pang complicated kasi nga dalawa yung 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 chambers natin. Sa parliament system of government, madali lang kasi nga iisa lang yung kanilang tagagawa ng batas, 'di ba, parliament. Sa atin, we have two. We have the House of Representatives, we also have the Congress. So dalawa 'yan na mahabang proseso na mag-repeat. Ito yung table, just read through this guys sa institution, the terms of office, qualifications, citizenships. Pero this is the process of law of creation or the process of law of creation. So, magsa-start yan sa either sa House of Representatives or Senate. May magpropose ng batas. Ayan. And then, mangyayari is gagawa ng first reading. Mag-i-introduce, babasahin yung batas na iyon sa House of Representatives. Sa second reading, magdedebate yung mga kongresista about sa specific ng batas. And then, mangyayari is that this will be discussed, the specific suggestions, the specific points that were made in the debate will be discussed by the chairs. Yung kanina nga, ito yung mga committees, i-discuss yan nila through the House committees. It will be considered in detail. And sa third reading, yung mangyayari dyan is the only thing that you could do sa third reading, babasahin ulit yung batas, and then you could either vote yes or no to the bill, right? But you cannot propose amendments or propose any changes or debate the bill anymore. Just say yes or no to the bill itself. And then after that, the bill is passed, and then it will go through the same process sa Senate natin. I-read ulit, pupunta sa second reading, i-discuss ulit, pupunta sa third reading, and then ipapasa yung bill, and then it needs to be signed by the government, by the president. But sometimes the president would veto this. Ibig sabihin, ayaw niya ng batas. Babalik ulit yan. So if you look at the amount of bills that are being passed per house, makikita natin is very, very small. Right? And it really goes through a lot of delays. Because kinakailangan ganito na complicated na process. Kailangan dadaan sa lower house, and then pupunta sa higher house or sa upper house, pupunta sa presidente. Kapag ayaw ng presidente, ibabalik, gagawa ng amendments, ibabalik ulit, so on. Ayan. Kapag ganito, 'di ba, bicameral, dalawa yung chambers, ganito ka-complicated, pero kapag unicameral, what the parliament does, it's a bit less complicated for this one. So, we have the preliminary stage. The lawmaker, 'di ba, would attempt to understand the legal needs of the people or constituents using hearing or consultations, and what they will do is they will create a draft of the bill, and then they would propose laws. And usually, guys, yung ating mga bills na yan, marami yan sila from the different party lists, from the different congressmen, the representatives. um, Marami yan sila. So for example, for the anti-political dynasty bills, you have so many. You have Miriam Defensor Santiago, you have the Akbayan group has their own, you have the different representatives have their own, and what they do, Franklin Drilon has his own as well. So it's coming from both houses. Yun yung kanilang ginagawa. And what they do, if they want to create a law that is a bit united, is they will combine this drafts of bills into one specific bill, right? Sometimes. And what it does is, what they do is that after that, they will propose or they will read the bill through the House of Representatives or through the Senate, and then they will diba, introduce the bill. What is read during the step is only the number and title of the bill, and therefore the Senate President of the Speaker of the House, noting the nature and content of the bill, will pass it to the House Committee or the Senate Committee. And the Senate Committee or the House Committee will investigate this. So, eto yung ating mga Senate Committee. Kapag, for example, it is a bill that has to do with tourism, Nancy Binay and her Senate Committee would examine what is in the bill. Hindi lang yan si Nancy Binay, but also representatives from the Department of Tourism, academics that have to do with the tourism. So they would get from the universities sa UP, Ateneo. You have the stakeholders, representatives from the private sector, from the masa. Lahat-lahat yan sila magkakaroon ng consultations, and they will debate the conditions of the bill. And after that, may nagkakaroon ng suggestions, and what will happen is that they will actually read. Sa second reading, the bill is examined, debated, or amended by members of the committees. And if approved by the majority of the members, the bill is printed in its final form and copies are distributed to senators or congressmen at least 3 days before the third reading. If disapproved, the sponsor has to refile it in a more acceptable way. So, gagawa sila ng amendments ulit. Depende sa kung ano sinabi doon sa discussion, di ba, ng ating kongresista. So, what happens during this time actually is yung mga masyadong radical na suggestions, nawawalan ng bisa. Kasi nga, if the Congress does not approve or if the House of Representatives does not approve certain things in the bill, sabihin natin na magbibigay sila ng 1,000 na basic income or 5,000 na basic income sa mga tao, sa lahat ng tao. And if the House of Representatives do not agree to that, they propose amendments. Instead of 5,000, 1,000 na lang, ganun. Ibabalik ulit. And then, what happens is that the committee will discuss this. Okay, okay ba yung 1,000? Or do we give another, or we put another, revision to this, and so on. So medyo matagal, 'di ba, yung proseso kasi nga nag-change. After that, kapag okay na, kapag na-approve na, 'di ba, or nagawa na ng finalization ng committee natin, mangyayari is that the bill is presented to the members of the Senate or the House. And then what happens to this one is that they cannot propose any amendments, they cannot debate the bill. They could either say yes or no. And then after that, if it is approved, it will be sent to the other house. So kapag nanggaling sa House of Representatives yung ating bill na ito, isa-send nila sa Senate. Kapag nanggaling sa Senate, Senate bill siya, isa-send sa House of Representatives, and then uulit yung proseso natin. So, yun nga, it's really really hard to pass certain laws. Kahit if you are an active member of the Congress, you will get really frustrated. Lalo na kapag the people in Congress do not really agree, 'di ba? Or a lot of them uh are not like friendly to the issues that you will have. So it's really, really hard to pass a law, guys. Ayan. For example, the death penalty bill, eto, hindi pa to napasa. So the Senate has, nagaling to sa House of Representatives, and the Senate is still discussing this one. Ayun. Pero for this one, syempre, pinasa na to sa upper house natin. Ayan. You also have the final stage. So this one is the final steps. An enrolled bill in the Congress becomes an effective law, but before it could become an effective law, it needs to be signed by the president. So it needs to be approved, pero kailangan ng signature. If not, what would happen is the president could say no, diba? It could veto certain parts of the law, or it could veto the whole, diba? But then what could happen is kapag, for example, gusto pa ring i-pursue ng Kongreso yung batas, either they could amend the law if they wanted, or they could do a majority vote. So two-thirds of the Congress could vote for the law for both houses. Yan. Aside from that, a law or a bill could become into a law if the president does not uh, decide at all. So kapag hindi niya sinign or hindi niya enact, 'di ba, pinabayaan niya lang, pwede maging effective yung law even without the signature if he did not decide to veto it at all. Right? So basically, a bill could pass into a law without the president kapag hindi nag-decide yung president whether to disagree with the law or to sign that bill into a law. Ayan. So you have the summary as well here. Ayan. Okay, are there any questions so far?
None po.
Okay, sige, sige. So, I'll just post this on the CLE, and again, I'll also post your handouts, and you can also take a quiz. I'll make sure that you can get 2 attempts sa quiz natin instead of just one, so that you could review as well for your exam. So that will be a 15-item quiz. Please take that tomorrow, siguro in the morning. Ayan. But then I'll make sure that it stays open on the weekend so that you could take that anytime. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll end the class here, and hope you have a good day and you're not so overwhelmed by all of this. Ayan. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye po.
Bye,
Thank
Chair. Thank you.
you.
Medyo
Bye-bye. Bye, Nori.